Okay, to start off, Singapore's medical device controls are actually aligned with the medical device total product life cycle. So through its conception and development all the way to the disposal, the controls are put in place in 3 different segments. So we regulate the product itself. So by doing so, we have product registration in place for class B, C, and D medical devices. So these are your medium to high risk medical devices. For example, the hypodermic needle syringe, all the way to your pacemakers. And then for this product registration, they are reviewed for safety, quality, and efficacy before they are actually allowed to be supplied and imported and supplied in Singapore. Apart from the product itself, we also license companies. So the intention for this, we issue 3 licenses. So there are manufacturer's license, importer's license, and wholesaler's license. And the licenses required for a company depends on the activities that the company does. So for example, if a company imports and wholesale, they only need the importer and wholesaler license. And if they manufacture medical devices in Singapore, then they will require the manufacturer's license. So the intention for licensing companies is to have a standard of supply chain in Singapore. So for example, if an in vitro diagnostic device, the storage condition is -2 to -8 degrees Celsius. So during import and storage, we have to ensure they have enough documentation that their warehouse have sufficient storage equipment to maintain the low temperature. And lastly, even with these 2 controls in place, the products can be imported and supplied by the company into the Singapore market. However, the controls doesn't stop there. We still have the post-market controls that come in place to complement the pre-market controls. So for example, reporting of adverse events, field safety corrective actions, and the goal here is to ensure that the medical devices that are used in Singapore continue to have safe and effectiveness on the general public. So a snapshot of post-market controls can be split into surveillance and vigilance. So surveillance, being the larger scope, is actually a more proactive effort by our agency to collect information on the safety and performance of use of medical devices in the market. So by one example of doing so is we regularly scan overseas regulatory agencies for alerts such as the FDA, US FDA, as well as UK MHRA. So if they have released such alerts, okay, we will need to check if the device is registered in Singapore and if they are impacted by the same issue. If yes, then we will follow up with the company to either recall or do the due corrective actions. The second smaller circle represents vigilance, which is a more reactive effort. So for companies, they are required to report and investigate adverse events and field safety corrective actions. And our role here is actually to detect safety signals as well as to ensure that any field safety corrective actions that they initiate and implement, the company has to follow through. So other forms of post-market vigilance include, apart from AEs and FSCAs, the companies are required to maintain distribution and complaint records. These are not required to be submitted to us, but in the event that we require, we may actually request such distribution and complaint records from the companies themselves for our own investigation purposes. And as part of their obligations as a medical device dealer in Singapore, they are prohibited to make any false and misleading advertisements and trade descriptions for their medical devices. So examples of misleading advertisements include claims such as claiming to cure cancer, cure diabetes, etc. So a bit more on adverse events reporting. So we have an adverse event definition. So it means any event or other occurrence that reveals any defect in any medical device or that concerns any adverse effect arising from the use thereof. In other words, so any malfunction of device when using it. We also have a reportable adverse event definition. So it just adds on 2 other points to the first definition. So firstly, it's associated with a medical device, and it has led to one of the patient impacts. So there are 4 patient impacts: death, serious public health threat, serious deterioration in state of health, and no death, serious injury, but it may lead to death or serious injury if it recurs. So I find that it's important to have a reportable adverse event definition. So this definition is in our guidance document because I believe it's good to be transparent to the industries. So when the industries refer to the guidance document, they can self-regulate, do some self-checks to determine if the event is reportable. So examples of adverse events, for example, for death, in the event that the AED fails to defibrillate, the patient dies, it will fall under this death category. For example, for serious public health threat, during the pandemic times, a COVID-19 self-test kit causes a false negative result. So in that sense, during the COVID-19 period, we actually received a lot of these cases. So we had to look at it in urgency. And there's also serious injury. An example of this would be a surgical drill bit fractures, and that causes the patient's vessel to dissect, so hemorrhage. This will be considered serious injury. And for others, is actually there's no patient harm, but due to luck or other circumstances, it might actually recur again. So in this case, infusion pump malfunctions, but in this event, luckily there was a nurse nearby that helps to rectify the error and resume the infusion that nullifies any patient harm. But in the event that the infusion pump malfunctions again and there's no nurse nearby, actually it may actually lead to a patient harm. So reporting timeline. So for companies, they are obligated to report any adverse event when they are aware of it. And the timeline for them to report to us is actually based on the severity of the event. So for serious public health threat is the most wide impact. So for that, if they are aware, they have to report to us within 48 hours. And for death or serious deterioration in health, it's more of an isolated case. So they have to inform us within 10 days. And if there's no patient harm, it's less than 30 days upon becoming aware of the event. So during adverse event review, what we actually look out for is what resulted in the event, or we call it causality assessment. So we look for a few things during our review for each adverse event. So one of the important ones that I would think it's product owner analysis. So the device in an ideal situation will be returned to product owner for inspection and analysis. So once received by the product owner, they will have to access the device, what caused the event to occur. So for example, if a balloon catheter ruptured, so the components of the balloon catheter will be returned to the product owner. From there, they will actually deduce, oh, this crack or this rupture, the line is very clean, so it's probably due to a sharp object poking it, possibly a calcified lesion. So from there, we can determine the root cause of it. So in the event, there are some cases where devices are not returned. These are cases where probably it was a pacemaker and is currently still implanted in the patient, or it could be a single-use device that was discarded in the operating theater after use. So in such cases, we normally pursue further for possible reasons for the event to occur. So the company may reply saying that, oh, it could be caused by some handling issues, or it could be caused by some storage condition issues. So apart from product device analysis, we also look at the device history review. So for reported affected lots, company will have to refer back to their records for any manufacturing anomalies. So this is to rule out any defects during manufacture. If yes, then they have to follow up through with their enhancement to their manufacturing processes. Okay, lastly, if they have any, after considering all factors, they have to inform us of any follow-up actions they intend to do. This may normally result in a field safety corrective action. If it's a systemic design, they will probably have to recall the device. If it's a manufacturing process, as mentioned, error, then they have to probably enhance their manufacturing process. Last bit, we also ask for the frequency of occurrence of similar events. But because Singapore is quite a small market, so we ask for both local as well as global rates. So this gives us a snippet of the safety profile of the device on how many similar events are observed in Singapore and throughout the world. Okay, so we move on to the significance of AA reporting. So for AA reporting, it's actually one of the core tools for post-market surveillance, and it's actually a very powerful tool that can be used for regulatory authorities to intervene timely and appropriately based on the real-world data that we receive. So for all the real-world data adverse events that we receive, it's actually just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, but if through scientific and logical risk assessment, we can actually gauge the impact of the safety signal to the general public. And from there, we can actually act on it appropriately. So what happens to adverse event reports that we receive? We receive it, we capture it in our database, we analyze it for potential risks and safety signals, and we can actually proceed. If there's a safety signal, we can proceed to instruct companies to investigate, or we can immediately intervene, either get the company to recall the device from the market, or we could actually cease supply of the device in extreme scenarios. So one other ways that actually helps us greatly in trend analysis is the use of IMDRF AE terminology codes. So Singapore is part of the IMDRF AE terminology work group along with Korea MFDS, Australia TGA, Health Canada, US FDA, and other countries. So for this AE terminological codes, we have 7 annexes, which aims to summarize each case by themselves. So for example, Annex A, we have a lot of codes for device problem, B for type of investigation, C investigation findings, Annex D conclusion, E the patient clinical signs and symptoms, F is the health impact or the medical intervention required, and G is the affected device component. So this is how the IMDR code looks like. There are 3 levels, and then the lower you go, if you go to L3, then it will contain more details of the event. So put it into perspective. So here's an example of A01 code. So it just says patient device interaction problem. But if you go down to level 2, you can see that it's either a patient device incompatibility or an issue with integration with the bone. Then if you go down to level 3 further, you can break up into more information, whether the device triggers reaction, inadequacy of device shape and size. So we try to normally use the lowest level, because then it will give us more information about the event. And so during trend analysis, the beauty of this is during trend analysis, you can do a simple filter and can give you some data analysis outputs that you desire. Okay, so I also like to introduce voluntary AA reporting. So normally the workflow for an event is that when devices are used in healthcare personnel or in healthcare institutions or medical device users, they normally file a complaint of the event to the medical device dealers. The medical device dealers will then obligated to report the adverse event and investigate to HSA. But then there's also a voluntary AA reporting route. So voluntary reporting route is the direct reporting from the healthcare personnel, medical device users to HSA. Then from then on, we will instruct the companies to submit an AE and then conduct an investigation. So for Singapore, actually, only 10% of AEs we receive are from the healthcare professionals and medical device users. This is because I think the legislation requires medical device companies to report, but not the healthcare professionals. Yeah, so we have actually performed some campaigns to try and encourage healthcare professionals to report adverse events, because we believe that with this increase in numbers, it actually represents a more accurate safety profile of the medical device in the real world. So it's more of like a missing piece to the real world evidence that we require to have a bigger picture and to appropriately intervene as required. Okay, so lastly, I will go through some case studies. So these are real scenarios that actually occurred in Singapore, and also shows the thought process as well as the follow-up actions that were enacted after knowing of the event, after risk assessment. So for the first case study is on an insulin pump. So we received this adverse event, first adverse event. So it was a cybersecurity issue that the insulin pump had. So the insulin pump is carried around with the patient, and then it actually automatically injects insulin into the patient at a certain time. So what happens was there was a cybersecurity threat that allows unauthorized personnel to connect wirelessly and maliciously change the insulin settings on the insulin pump themselves. So the patient impact here will be either increased or decreased insulin, leading to hypoglycemia and probably hospitalization if the patient did not realize. So for this, after investigation, we realized that actually there's a high noted frequency. There's a widespread health risk because the flaw here is actually systemic. It's the issue with the design themselves. So it affects all devices using the same software version. So with this, we intervened quickly. So what we did is we requested the company to initiate a field safety corrective action. So with that, they had to disseminate a field safety notice to all affected users to inform them of the issue as well as any workarounds that they have. So the workaround here is actually to upgrade the software, which is under point 2. So for the company, they investigated, they reviewed that their initial design, they didn't consider cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So they actually rolled out a new software version to patch and to rectify the issue. The company also at the same time took the chance to improve their process. So now they have a new SOP to address cybersecurity detection and management. Okay, this is the second case study. So the second case study is about ultrasound gel. So ultrasound gel, in August 21, we received reports of contamination in 2 brands from a local healthcare institution. So this contamination was by a bacteria called Bacteria cepacia. So it can be found in soil and water and is normally responsible for hospital-acquired infections. And the problem here is actually they are resistant to common antibiotics. So again, there's a widespread patient impact. So we did our investigation and we found they all trace back to the same manufacturing site, totaling 3 brands of affected gels. So with widespread patient impact, we immediately issued a quarantine notice to cease supply for all lots and batches of affected ultrasound gels. We also tried to reach out to all local users, so mainly your healthcare institutions, to stop use and quarantine all lot and batches immediately. And just for verification, we also sent samples of the ultrasound gels to recognized labs to test specifically for B. cepacia. And true enough, they came back positive for B. cepacia. However, after ceasing the supply, we were also informed a few months later that there was a shortage of ultrasound gel. There was a supply crunch. So we actually lifted the ceased supply. But however, we required every supply of each batch to be allowed only through a negative B. cepacia test report. So they had to show that that batch was tested negative for this bacteria. Then we will allow the import and supply in Singapore. Okay, for my last case study, it's on macro-textured breast implants. So in 2017, there were increased reports of BIA-ALCL. So BIA-ALCL stands for breast implant associated anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So it's actually a rare type of cancer that develops around the breast implant. So there were increased reports from Australia and USA, and our first touch was to send out an email communication to local healthcare institutions to inform them of this risk. At the same time, we also communicated with our pre-market department for ongoing product registrations for macro-textured breast implants to have a mandatory labeling information specifically for BIA ALCL. So in 2019, with increased scientific evidence as well as increased reports of BI-ALCL, we actually convened an expert panel as well as a medical device advisory committee to discuss the risks and mitigations for BI-ALCL. So what we did is we informed the doctors to increase awareness and expedite diagnosis of BI-ALCL for existing patients. So this will allow them for a timely intervention in case the patient has been diagnosed with BI-ALCL. We also outreach to release a press release to educate public on the risk, and the information includes observable symptoms that the patient could feel, so things like your lumps or some pain or swelling. And existing patients are actually urged to visit the doctor for any follow-up. Then lastly, we prepared an infographic on BI-ALCL for ease of explantation and risks and symptoms. So this infographic was intended for new as well as existing breast implant customers. So the picture on the right was the infographic. So the risk of developing BI-ALCL was actually 1 in 3,000 to about 1 in 30,000. So this risk was deemed unacceptable for that time. So eventually we had to send a notice of suspension to all macro-textured breast implants device in Singapore. So to my best knowledge, I think there are no macro-textured breast implants registered in Singapore at the moment.